Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. I have a special episode for you today because my friend Tara is celebrating 500 subscribers over on her YouTube channel, which is The Paper Snob. I will leave all the links down below for this celebration hop so you can go visit Tara's channel, leave her some love, and then check out the other hoppers she's invited along. We are going to be using selfies and stitching on this layout project, so let's dive into that. So I took this selfie specifically for this project of these sewing patterns that I've been meaning to get to. I have a real issue with women's clothing not having pockets. Since I carry an extra pair of glasses, sometimes hearing aids, and my cell phone, I need that stuff to be on my body at all times. So I need clothing with pockets. And I just haven't yet gotten to these projects. So I'm going to make that happen. I pulled out my counterfeit kit as well as some sewing themed dies that I'm going to use for some embellishing. And I'm just going to start with my counterfeit kit and see what I'm going to add into that at this point. The first thing to do, of course, is to pull out a selection of papers. Do you ever struggle with photos that are less than stellar, but you have these beautiful papers that you would like to use and it just feels like such a big mismatch? That was how I was feeling about this photo because my space is in the basement, both sewing and crafting. And taking photos of me down there, you can see all the ugliness of the basement in the background. But you know what? It is what it is. This is my real life. This is my real space. And I'm definitely grateful to have this space because there have certainly been times in the past when I didn't. And it just would be nice if it were pretty. So I can dream, right? At any rate, I have chosen a selection of papers. I'm going to do a lot of matting behind this photo just to give it, because I'm doing a single photo layout, just to give it lots of detail and finesse back there. And one of my papers happens to be like a sweatery print, so I thought that would work perfectly for this. I did get some die cuts out of some scraps from my counterfeit kit this time around, and I'm going to use those as part of my embellishing. It won't be a huge part of it, but I will tuck those in there here and there. So I'm going to start off with all of that layering detail that I had mentioned, and I'm having a hard time seeing these days, which is why I have two pairs of glasses. And so I had to kind of tip that trimmer up so that I could see where those marks were on there. All right, as I come to the end of choosing these layers, actually, I know I will go back and do one more layer, but I'm going to kind of offset these layers in a way that I like, just because I'm going to do that. So I'm going to put all of these layers off to the left, and you'll see why in a minute when it comes into my stitching. So first I'm going to work on my title, and I have this alpha set from Vicky Boutin, which has layers of color. It's got like a stacked look to it, and I'm going to do the same thing with my stitching. So we will get to that. Oh, here's where I'm starting that. I am going to do a giant check mark because my title is Just Do It. I totally, of course, thought of the Nike theme check mark, and my check mark won't look like theirs, but I am going to use that as my stitching. And I will show you more of that when we get there. All right, all my layers are done now. I did add one more layer there. I've got a much bigger check mark because that check mark is going to be the home for my title as well as be my stitching. I had to align it so that it's not going over my photo. While you can sew on photos for sure, I didn't want to in this case. And sewing on photos can be a little trickier because the glossiness of the print can kind of snag on the stitching a little bit. I did draw dots on my check mark first. That way I could erase them if they were awkwardly spaced. And then I use a paper piercer and a foam mat to pre-pierce my all of my stitching lines because it's much, much easier to do hand stitching on a layout if you pre-pierce that. And then I needed to decide on the color of my thread. So what I'm doing here is collecting my other embellishments first so that I can figure out what colors are going to play along in this layout. Now, the papers that I chose for the background, pardon me, were all very multicolored. Not all, but I had enough colors going on in the background. My photo's pretty neutral so that I can play with whatever embellishment colors I want. So as I pulled out the embellishments that I liked, I'm starting to group them into colors, and I will grab a embroidery floss that will go along with that. And so I will be using the embroidery floss for hand stitching. And I'm going to come up with, 4 to 6 colors so that I can layer my check mark, just like that alpha title set has layers to it. And you'll see all of that as we go. All right, I didn't have quite the best match for that peachy set of embellishments or a light blue that I wanted for some of the embellishing, but I made do with the colors that I did have. Oh, here I traded out one lighter red for a darker red because I liked the contrast of that better and the look of that better with the other colors of floss. So if you don't do hand stitching, here's my best tip. Buy a needle threader if you're going to use embroidery floss, because that's going to help you get those strands of the floss through your needle. Because embroidery floss has multiple strands to it, they tend to kind of split apart, and that's a feature for doing different types of embroidery. So you can use more or fewer threads for a thinner or thicker look. But that can be annoying if you're just hand stitching. So I'm just going to use a back stitch here, and I got my needle threaded using my handy dandy needle threading tool. And back stitching just means that you stitch one stitch forward and then go back to the previous stitch and keep going along that way as you sew, and that will fill in every single space along your stitching line. And I'm going to finish off this one batch of back stitching, and when I get to the beginning or the end of a thread, I always tape it down to the back of my project to hold it in place. Now here's where I'm going to layer up that stitching. I'm going to trim this little template that I made, trying to keep an even-ish border to where that stitching is, and then I'm going to use that template to repeat this process for each color of thread I picked. And I'm going to go ahead and put these threads in the order that I want them to be in, so that I kind of have, because I have some lighter colors and darker colors, I kind of want to disperse those so that they balance each other out. Okay, with all of that done, you can see my stitching holes here for every single line of the color, and it's not perfect because doing this template with trying to keep the stitching rows even, it's just not a perfect process, and I'm okay with that. But as you can see, when I got to the end, I am very happy with it. Now the point of the arrow does flow off the bottom of the page, and I'm purposefully did that. I was going to say I'm okay with it, but I really did that on purpose because I do like things to kind of flow off the edges of the page often, because it leaves a little bit of, I don't know, I want to say mystery for the brain, I guess, but it makes your eye and your brain have to kind of fill in the blanks of what's off the page. And I think it's more interesting that way. All right, I am going to go ahead and group my embellishments by color, and I'm moving them around now because I had things weren't fitting quite as well as I wanted them to. So I'm just going to move them in different places so that they fit a little bit better. And I'm going to definitely pop some elements up on foam dots, and these tiny sewing elements that I had require tiny foam dots, which I use the 3L micro foam dots, and I'll link you up to those below if you don't know about them, because they have been a lifesaver for a lot of the die cutting that I've been doing lately to get these small spaces. I do have some pink fresh chipboard frames there that I'm going to frame up with some of my elements here to add lots of texture to this layout. The stitching and the frames and the popped up die cutting, this layout has a lot of great texture, and I think that's a good story to tell with sewing. Now my title and my checkmark stitching, while it definitely plays into my sewing photo, you don't have to tell stories about sewing to use stitching on your layouts, and I'm sure you already know that, but I just want to say it to make sure. If you've got this Just Do It title, you could use that for anything, right? If you're trying to start a new exercise routine or trying to eat healthier, or you need to feel motivated to get something done, this is great for that. And I really liked using that check mark for this theme. So I'm adding just tiny little bits of embellishment to the rest of those clusters there. And then I'm going to put my journaling underneath that check mark. And that's going to help balance out the really heaviness of my embellishment clusters and photo cluster up there with my journaling down below. All right, I do hope you will go check out Tara's channel for sure and see what she has to offer. She does a lot of stitching herself, and so that is why she had us do that. And please do, if you have some time, check out the other hoppers along the way too, because we all love to share what we do here and hopefully share tips and tricks with you. And I do hope I have done that for you today. If you have any questions, comments, go ahead and drop me a note down below and I'll be happy to answer any of that. And until next time, I hope you have an artful day.